This is one of the cars I've been most excited to spend a week with all year, and that's because there's a very solid chance that my wife and I will end up with this one in our garage. So let's take a deep dive and see if the IONIQ 5 deserves a spot in the garage. The first thing we'll cover, and the thing everybody wants to hear, that's your range. In rear-wheel drive spec, you can get 303 miles of range according to the EPA. What I have here is the limited trim with HTRAC all-wheel drive. It adds another $5,000-ish to your price tag, but what you get is dual motor, all-wheel drive, and that sucks your range down to about 257 miles according to the EPA. This week I did plug it in, charge it all the way up to 100, and I got about 248, which is what we're showing on the dash. But that was with climate on. The next thing we need to talk about is the 1.5 million ways to recoup energy or range while driving. We're all familiar with the term regen braking, but what you have here is a plethora of regen braking options available to you. I talk about this in a lot of EVs, and here's why. If you use the downshift paddle, you can up your regen to the max regen setting, or I pedal, which is essentially like a one pedal drive, and that's when the car is going to automatically recoup as much range, energy, power as it can when you come off of the throttle. A lot of people really like the one pedal driving thing, but to me, I really don't. And it's not just a Hyundai specific thing, I just don't really like the one pedal driving. In this, with the I pedal on, I have to go so much deeper into the throttle pedal to get the car to actually move. And then the second I take my foot off the throttle, it has a really, really aggressive braking feel. Could you get used to it? Yeah. Could you get smooth with it? I'm sure. But for me, personally, I'd rather just leave it in regen level 1 or 0 myself. Then of course, in level 1, you'd still need to use the brakes to come to a complete stop. And when you do use the brakes, you will recoup energy. Then there's regen totally off. If you hit the right paddle all the way to dial off your regen, you'll get level 0, which essentially should mean 0 regen. However, when I come off the throttle, ever so slightly, I start to see a little bit of charge show up on my graphic on the dash. The interesting thing though is when you're on regen level 0 and you use the brake pedal, that does not increase your recouping of energy. I don't understand that. It's a brake pedal. If it's the brakes and you're regenning through the brakes, shouldn't it automatically work when you get on the brake pedal regardless of what level you're on? It's a little weird, but I found myself this week making a bit of a game out of it. When I set off, I have my regen in level 0, so there's no resistance, there's no recouping of the brake at all. The car feels sharp, quick, and dynamic. And then I can just lift and coast, and this thing will coast for decades. There's no resistance, there's no engine spinning to slow you down, so it'll coast forever. But then when a corner does come up or I need to stop, then I'll use the downshift paddle, the left paddle, to just dial in some regen and let the car regenerate for you. And that, I think, is probably the most economical way, or the best way to maximize your range in this car. Okay, so now with my range and regen rant over, let's finally talk about how this thing is to drive. But in the dual motor version that I have here, which is what I would buy, even though it's like another $5 grand more like I mentioned, you get 320 horsepower and 448 pound-feet of torque. Yeah, it's not crazy horsepower numbers that you're used to seeing dominate the headlines, but it's perfectly adequate for anyone. It feels perfectly sharp in sport mode, and the thing is, this is like half the price of all of those other cars. Okay, we're dialed into sport. We're gonna leave the, oh God, see? It's plenty quick in sport mode. Of course, that'll sharpen your throttle response, but what I'm saying is, even in this, the non-N car, the non-super high-powered car, you have plenty of performance, plenty of drama, and the only thing that I'm really missing is the propulsion sound that you would get in something like the Mustang Mach-E. Would add a little bit of theater to it. Of course, with the various regen options, the power delivery will feel more smooth and gradual or more sharp and stabby, but no one wants to hear me talk about regen anymore. What you do want to hear about is the different feelings you get in the different drive modes. This is the interesting thing about electric cars. You know, they're all kind of the same car at their core. So what the manufacturers do to differentiate them is focus on how the power is delivered, how much power is available to you, and some, of course, will synthesize or manufacture a sound to go along with your throttle pedal. Hyundai has done a really nice job here in giving you a noticeably different character and a noticeably different power delivery and experience depending on what mode you're in. In normal mode, you have a slight feeling, almost like an internal combustion car, where when you're off the throttle, you get a little bit of like engine braking sensation or some regen, but then, you know, you can roll on the power pretty predictably. In sport mode, you dial things up and then the throttle response is instantaneous. I mean, you heard my water bottle go crashing through the tailgate when we were at that stoplight. So it is a lot more stabby. It's a more immediate power delivery. And then when you tailor it all the way back into eco mode, that's when the power gradually builds, as if to ask you, like, are you really sure you want to use all this power? Is it worth it? Interestingly enough, over the course of this week, I've found myself mostly in eco mode because, well, range anxiety is still a thing, with slight dapples of sport mode when I want to have a little bit of fun. I'm almost never in normal mode. Of course, the sharpness and difference in power in the different modes means you're using the battery in higher or lower strain, which of course affects your range. The dash will change the estimated range based on what mode you're in, which is nice to see if you need to extend the range. Okay, so we've covered the battery stuff, the charging stuff, and the power stuff, but what is this thing like to just simply get in and drive? And in a word, I'd use fantastic. It's a very familiar car and thus driving experience. The steering is a normal rack, it's not steer-by-wire, so you do have a decent sense of what your front wheels are doing. The suspension is a strut front and a multi-link rear, and the wheelbase is longer than you would get in the 3-row big family SUV, the Palisade that Hyundai has. So what you get is a really refined and comfortable and relaxed driving experience over road imperfections. It's a nice, really nice ride. The dash is really low, so I can see everything. It's like a fishbowl in here. And then the glass is thick, and they've added carpet, and they've done a lot to the cabin to keep noise down, so it's whisper quiet in here when you're on a decent road and not driving through construction, which is apparently everywhere around my house. And I guess at the end of the day, as a tool to get from A to B with as little drama as possible, I can't really think of a better tool than this that's on sale today. Ultimately, behind the wheel, I'm very impressed with the IONIQ 5. It's quick enough and dynamic enough to be fun and exciting when you want it to be, but it does the simplicity and comfort things so well when you need it to. So let's step outside and talk details. Okay. So far, I'm really impressed with this thing, but as we talk about the outside, we have to talk about some of the more important details. Now, one, as we start to talk about the styling, you either love it or you hate it. It's kind of got the 80s cyberpunk, you know, very pixel, you know, and we'll get to some of that stuff. I personally like it. I personally only like it in either the cyber gray or the shooting star. Now, the shooting star is more of a matte finish, so I know with some of the Mercedes Magno colors, you can't take it through a car wash, not even a touchless one, so wondering about the durability of a matte finish paint job on a Hyundai. Again, that's not really mine to speculate, but hey, if it ends up in my garage, maybe it will be. But let's talk about some of the stuff that's going on up front here. This has a pretty short hood for EVs, so you actually really don't have much of a frunk in here. You have a little bit of storage, but it's not much. You have a really big Hyundai badge up here, but the front here, as we start to talk about the headlights and some of the other front fascia, we're gonna start to notice a theme with this video, and it's the fact that there are squares or pixels everywhere. They're in the black center grille here, I guess you could say. This is where your charging status would be if you have it plugged in. So that has a white pixelated, or I guess square light that shows up how much charge you have. Of course, you have your LED headlights, and these are fantastic. Even built inside the housing is the etching of like square, so it's everywhere. This, in my opinion, the running lights, this is what BMW i cars should have looked like. This is a modern interpretation of the Angel Eye. I think it would have been good. But once we start to get down here, like, there's just a lot going on stylistically, and to the point where it's sometimes too much. Of course, this is body colored here. You have your radar sensors for your parking, but then you have all of this silver trimming, and these will open up to allow air to come in and cool the front motors, because obviously this is the all-wheel drive, or you have the dual motor up front here, so that will cool that. But there's just a lot going on, and especially as we get around the side here, it continues that way with these wheel arches. Now notice that there's almost like a little vortex, little etching on each of the wheel arches here. It's a cool design. It's a different color than the body color, which I think, you know, and this is kind of why I like the Cyber Gray or the Shooting Star more, because I think it fits with this, because this color is going to stay the same regardless of trim. Down here you have 20-inch wheels. They look, in my opinion, pretty cool. You can tell that they're built to not really allow much wind to come in. A big, you know, deep dish 20-inch 5-spoke wheel is going to let a lot of air in, and that's going to hurt your range. So they've done a smart way of kind of covering up a lot of that while wrapping it in the Michelin Primacy tire, which does a good job of balancing the sport performance and grip with also a lower rolling resistance, so you can maximize your range. One thing to also notice with these wheels is where they're placed. So they are on the extreme ends of the car. Look at this overhang. It's like 3, 4, 5 inches. Again, we talk about it behind the wheel. The really long wheelbase, it's longer than the 3-row Palisade, and that lends itself a lot to the better, more refined ride that you get here. Again, speaking of that, looking at the side of this thing, you can see that in pictures it looks like a little sporty hatchback, and it has a lower ride height, so it is kind of hatch-ish. The driving position has you a little bit more up high, but it's kind of more crossover in that sense. But it is a big car. It is a full SUV. You have a huge amount of space on the interior, and we'll get to that, but it is still big. This is not a small hatchback. Of course, here on your wing mirror, you have your sequential turn signal. That is, again, square, but this is more angular and geometric. Blacked out window treatments, really dark tinting back here. Of course, you've got some, I guess, overdone rocker panel design here, and then your big Z cut that we're kind of more familiar with in the Hyundai design. The interesting thing, again, that I always say is, how do manufacturers deal with door handles? The I guess, irritants of door handles, because they have to be flush with the car to maximize range, especially in an EV. So what Hyundai's done here is they've gone for a lever design, and personally I don't like it. Your hand does kind of slip off the end at times. My wife's complained about that a number of times in her testing. So it is not perfect, but it's better than some of the other applications that we've seen. Now, one of the nice things is, of course, as it locks, the wing mirrors fold in, and then those retreat back into the door. And as you walk up to it, you don't even have to unlock it or push the little button on the door handle. The car will unlock itself and give you the door handle as you come up to it. So that's pretty cool. Around back, again, very geometric, very angular and square. This rear door is massive, but again, big 20-inch wheels, Michelin Primacies, pretty good. Here, though, is where we start to get to the charging door, which doesn't like to always work. So what I actually end up having to do is pull out the key, hold it, and then it will open itself. So here is nice because you have, again, pixels or squares, and then you have in this trim, in the limited trim, you have a vehicle to load charger. So not only can you plug it in and charge here, but you can actually also use the power from your car battery to charge things like your laptop, or if you're gonna go camping or something like that. So that is nice to have. The annoying thing here is, though, this is on the back of the car. I pull into my driveway, or my garage, I should say, forward, and the charger, the outlet in my garage, is at the back. So I would prefer, like they have in the Kona EV, to have the charging port up front, or an option closer to the front of the car. Otherwise, I have to run a cable all the way through or back into the garage, which is an annoyance. Around the back, it's very geometric. Up here, you have a big wing because, of course, aero is important. Down here, big Hyundai badge, and then a really cool kind of like, it's full square LED tail bar. It's full width, but your reverse lights, your brake lights, and your rear tail lights are only on that, I guess, the outer edges of it. In the center, you do have a white IONIQ 5 badge, and then again, you have some seemingly useless design here with the little mustache under the tail bar and a silver diffuser with your HTRAC badge and that sort of thing. And I guess the only thing that I'll say before we step inside is you don't have kick to open tailgate, which I think is really the only miss from the exterior functionality of this. But with that, let's jump inside. Okay, then jumping on the interior here, there's essentially two interior color options. You can either get a black or a gray. This is the gray, And the gray actually ends up being more of a white to me. Now, to get the full experience, I would say that I would go with the gray here. The way they've used space here is amazing. It's so big, there's so much light, you have this massive pano roof, and that with the lighter interior really makes it feel big, comfortable, and relaxing. And I really like that. And speaking of relaxing, there may come a time where you need to charge this thing on the road and you need to stop at a plug-in public infrastructure charger. And what they've done here is they've thought of that and they've given you a recliner essentially. So you have somewhere comfortable to sit as you wait your, however long it takes to charge, depending on what you're plugged in at. If you do have the DC fast charger, you can get up to 80% in 18 minutes. I think it's from like 20 or 10% or whatever it is, but it's one of the faster options out there, which is pretty impressive. Now, speaking of the materials in here, they're really, really nice. And you have so many different textures, materials. You've got this like leatherette, you've got soft touch plastics, you've got aluminums, you've got, some wool and some interesting like woven fabric. It's really kind of cool. It gives a sense of specialness and really expensiveness. The design overall is very familiar car to me. It's not crazy minimal like you would get in a Tesla. It's easy to just get in and kind of know what you're doing right away. There's square patterning on the door cards, on the seat embossments, and like everywhere. Again, the square theme continues in here. But we'll talk about some of the more granular details here. We talk about these screens. There's these two big screens for your cluster and your infotainment system. There's a good amount of bezel for each of the screens, but it kind of has to be that way because you have to fit a screen around the steering wheel because you can't see through a steering wheel, obviously. But then more speaking specifically about the digital gauge cluster, on the left of it, you have this like fabric panel here, and I didn't know what it was, and I used magnets to mount a lot of my camera gear, and I guess the magnet got close enough and it's magnetic there. I don't know what you would put there, maybe your phone, but I also have the magnet on the back of my phone and it didn't stay. So maybe I just need a different magnet, I don't know. But that kind of makes sense because there's not really a great place to put a phone in here. You don't have wireless Apple CarPlay, so you would need to plug it in, which means you probably need to plug it into the center console here, which means it's going into your cup holder or below on the wireless charger. So maybe it's for a phone, I don't know. But then back to the actual digital gauge cluster itself. It's great. The lighting is good, even in harsh midday light like we have right now. I can see all of the graphics, all of the colors, the transitions are smooth. It's really responsive and adaptive. It gives me all of the information I could possibly want. No complaints whatsoever. I do like that it changes with your drive modes and so on. And above that, you do have a head-up display, and you have a couple options. You can either turn it off, you can have a normal head-up display with your speed limit, and then also the status of your driver assist systems, or you can have an augmented reality head-up display, which will kind of work with the onboard navigation to show you where you need to turn, which is pretty cool, and I'm impressed that there's something like that in a Hyundai like this. Mercedes piloted that a couple years ago, so it's already making its way into Hyundais, which is impressive. Now, jumping back in and talking about the actual steering wheel. It's a two-spoke design. It's pretty cool. There's not a Hyundai badge in here. I like that I can rest my hand at the bottom. That's how I typically drive. On the left, you have all of your stuff to control your media, your phone, your music volume, song selection, that sort of thing. And then on the left, you also have your drive mode. It looks very much like you should be able to spin it. You can't, it's a button, not really a big deal, but just something of note. And then on the right-hand side, you of course have your information and your controls for your adaptive cruise, your lane keep, and all that stuff. This Hyundai system we talk about a lot on the channel. It's very good, and here it's even better. There's a huge amount of construction around my house, and it did, the changing lanes with the temporary lane lines really, really well. It kept up, with traffic as it moved forward, as it slowed down. It's a fantastic system. I really, really like it. But behind it, of course, you have your gear selector, which is it's kind of interesting. It actually makes a lot of sense. It frees up a lot of space down here, and you just twist it forward to go to drive, twist it backwards to go to reverse, and then the button on the end, like park. That park button is very much Mercedes, so you're kind of maybe noticing a little bit of a theme here. Then, of course, the other screen is the infotainment itself. It's very Hyundai, so I won't go into a lot of detail. It's very familiar if you've been in a Hyundai or if you've watched other Hyundai reviews of ours. Of course, you have the sounds of nature, which is, of course, a must. You do have quiet mode, like we talked about in the Palisade, and, of course, the Telluride. You do have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but they are not wireless. That's really the only miss, I think, on the interior of this cabin. The 360 cameras are pretty decent. They're very responsive. They give you a lot of different views. There is a little bit of warping, though, so It's not perfect, but it is pretty good. And of course you have that like augmented reality where you can swipe and, you know, adjust the car from there, which is like probably more of a gimmick than anything. I didn't really find an actual application to use it for it this week. Below you have air vents, and then below that you have hard buttons for things like your map, your navigation, media. You have a favorites button, your parking cameras, and your parking sensors. You of course have a physical volume knob, which is great. And then underneath you have touch buttons, or they don't even have haptic feedback, but that's how you would control your climate controls. The thing that's not integrated here is a button for your heated seat, your cooled seat, which you have in the front, as well as a heated steering wheel. You also have heated seats in the back, but there's not a button for it. What you would have to do is you would have to hit this warmer button, which will take you to a screen, which of course you can immediately adjust your heated and cooled seat, but it is kind of a bummer that's not actually right there in front of you. And then down below that even, of course, this is a ground up EV, so there's no transmission tunnel, so you have a huge amount of foot space. You do have a cubby down there for my emotional support water bottle, along with a 12 volt and a USB charger, which is really nice. And then behind that, of course, you have your center console. And this is the big gimmick that Hyundai is kind of parading around. It's the center console that slides forward and back for whatever you need. I don't really know why you would need it to move backwards or forward, but I guess it's cool that it does. You have cup holders, you've got USB chargers here, not USB-C, interestingly. You have a wireless charger underneath, and that's pretty much like on the floor. Not quite on the floor, but it's pretty low. So again, not the most natural place to put a phone. Of course, you do have a storage cubby above you under your armrest as well. Other little treatments are the loop door handles, which I really like. They have kind of a future-y feel to it. You have Bose speakers in here, and the ones that are in your door cards light up with whatever color you want your ambient light. I think there's like 64 colors or something, but there's a lot of colors. And then speaking of the rear seats, they're fantastic. They're huge, they slide, they recline, they're heated, in this trim at least, and they're pretty much perfect. There's a full like 120 volt outlet at the bottom of the center of the rear seat back there, which is very nice to have. Again, that's that vehicle to load stuff, so you can use the power here to charge other stuff. You have the huge sunroof to bring in so much light with the lighter interior. Makes it feel really big in here. You have chargers back there. Your air vents are not in your center console because that's the thing that slides backwards and forwards, so they're built into the door pillars. I guess they would be your B pillars. And the last thing on the rear seats is just that you have manual sunshades. So if you've got babies back there or you just don't want to be seen, the tinting is really aggressive on the rear seats as well, so you'll have plenty of privacy back there. And then finally the trunk. It's decent size, but honestly it's not huge, and I think that's probably due to the exterior shape of this thing. There's a lot of tapering on that rear glass, so I guess that's probably where it comes from, but it's definitely still totally usable. You get a privacy cover, you get a 12 volt out there, and that sort of thing. So in my experience this week, it's been perfectly usable to go to Costco and whatever. So I think with that, it's probably a good time to get into the final thoughts. So there it is, the Hyundai IONIQ 5. It's an incredibly impressive, affordable EV. With a base price of around $40,000 and topped out limited all-wheel drive around $55K, it's not necessarily cheap, but you're getting so much car here. Me personally, I'd take this over a Mustang Mach-E, the ID4, the Model Y, and we'll get the sister EV6 at the end of this month, so depending on how that is, you just might find this IONIQ 5 in my garage. Thank you so much for watching, we'll see you in the next one.